How do you make 3D animation look cinematic? Where do you put the cameras? What lenses do you use? How about the lighting? All important stuff for your Unreal films. So let's dive in. Welcome to Feed on Visual. I've been making films since I was a teenager, and over the years I picked up commercials and ads and portrait photography, among others. And no other part of the project gets me as excited and terrified at the same time as cameras and lighting. Why? Because so much of every project lives or dies by the cinematography. Can we get this shot, or can we light it in a way that pushes the story and visuals forward? Or will it be just kind of bland and boring? In 3D, the tendency often seems to be to put the cameras everywhere and make them go everywhere just because we can, and it's relatively easy, at least when compared to a physical camera. And while it's nice to have that freedom to do crazy shots, it doesn't mean that you always should. It's okay to go wild when the story you're seeing calls for it, but sometimes it's best to show restraint and give room for other things in the scene. It might be hard to focus on the actor's performance if the camera is just whipping around like crazy. So place and move your camera with intent, in service of the scene. For the Craving, I filmed it just the same as I would have done it for real, in a real location with a real camera. For a moment, I thought about going for a handheld look, but I feel in 3D it can be a bit of a gimmick. I think it comes from 3D being inherently static until you animate it. You literally have to breathe life into it, which can take a lot of work. So constantly moving the camera gives you another layer of movement, which then kind of adds to the life of the scene. But again, don't do it because you feel you need to. Do it if you think it's right for the scene. So, since there was a sense of stillness in the story of the Craving, I decided for the most part to treat the camera as if it were on a tripod and only move it to match the state of mind of the character, like the sense of urgency or unease. In Unreal, my favorite and probably the easiest way to get the shot lined up is to fly around the scene as you normally would, and once you find your angle, just hit the camera icon in the sequencer and it creates a cinecam right there where you were looking at. It drops it into the sequencer and automatically lets you pilot it. I mentioned this because there are other ways of doing this, which include more steps. If you move the camera throughout your shot, then make sure the keyframes are linear to keep the same steady speed. But if the camera starts or stops moving mid-shot, then make it ease in or ease out to get the most natural movement. The goal is not to draw attention to the camera with weird jerky movements. Now, if you're going for that handheld vibe, you can either use procedural camera shake, which is fast and easy and fine if you need it only here or there. Or you can record your own camera shake and movement using your phone. A real film camera is heavier than a phone, so you might consider attaching the phone to some sort of rig with some weights to control the level of the shake and get rid of the sort of micro jitters. Okay, so you got your cameras placed and animated. Next piece of the puzzle is often overlooked but can have a huge impact. The lenses. In the real world, there are so many different lenses. Cheap ones, expensive ones, the really expensive ones. Some are clean and nice and pristine, and some are just plain weird. Traditionally, ones often used in production are 24 and 35mm focal lengths as wide lenses, 50mm as a good medium for most things, nifty 50 as it's sometimes called, and maybe 75 to 85mm for close-ups. There are of course more, but if you're just now learning about lenses, I'd start with 35, 50, and 85 and play around with those to get the feel of their differences. Use 35 for a wide establishing shot where you show the audience where the scene takes place, then moving closer and use a 50mm to show the character, and finally get a nice close-up of their face with an 85mm. This idea of starting wide and moving in closer and closer as the scene progresses works well in editing as well, slowly pulling the audience deeper into the story and also like grounding them physically, like where is the scene taking place and where are we looking at. In 3D, you can of course cheat and manipulate all the settings like crazy, like depth of field, which in the real world is tied to the focal length. There's a lot more to this, but simply put, the longer your focal length is, the more shallow the depth of field is, as in only a small part of your frame is in focus and most of it is just blurry. You adjust this with the aperture value, but just know that this is how lenses naturally behave and the effect is usually a desired one. Lenses bend light and usually it distorts a little before hitting the camera sensor. So sometimes you hear about lens distortion. The very high-end expensive lenses aim for less distortion, whereas some cheap lenses distort like crazy. And neither are right or wrong. It's called the character of the lens. It usually happens around the very edge of the frame, where it bends and often blurs the image and distorts the color, which is called chromatic aberration, and finally adds this dark vignette. All real lenses do this, some more than others. 3D cameras don't. They're perfect. And after so many years of watching films and photos shot with real lenses, we feel there's something fake about perfect 3D renders. So what we can do is to emulate the lens using plugins. There's a nice plugin for Blender that I might get, but for the Craving I use this anamorphic depth of field Unreal plugin. There are others, but I happen to use this one and it worked great. It had nice lens presets with their own levels of distortion and offered good control and quality. Now, if I'm honest, I've never had the pleasure of trying anamorphic lenses with real cameras, so I really want to try it here on this project. Could have probably done without, but it's a cool look. But with such wide aspect ratio, it can be a bit tricky to get good compositions, so you need to get a feel for it. Also, the anamorphic lenses don't quite operate the same with the usual focal lengths. So there was a bit of an experimenting there, but got the hang of it pretty quickly. But this plugin was a big part of the look of the film, so if you're going for that natural cinematic look, don't be afraid to distort and mess up your image a bit. Something that usually goes with the cinematic film look is film grain. Now you can add grain in Unreal using the post-process volume, but I had a kind of special post-process of my own later in the edit, so I didn't bake the grain in the render and got clean shots out of Unreal instead. But more on that on a later video. Hey, congrats on making this far in the video. You mean business. Let me know when you release your film, and I'll be there with a healthy dose of popcorn and praise. You can do it. You can do anything, including pressing the subscribe button, right? Okay, thanks. Okay, let's talk about lighting. This part in real productions takes time, effort, teamwork, and talent, and gear. So much gear. Meanwhile, in 3D, bling! Oh, would you look at that? A beautiful light that I can put anywhere and make any size and color. It stays on forever and doesn't cost a damn thing. I know it's not fair. Lighting is an art form and it can seem very intimidating. And I'm not saying it's easy, but like art, it can have many interpretations. So don't be afraid of experimenting and trying out different things, because there are many solutions to any one problem. In film, I say light has three functions. First, a technical one. You need light to expose an image. Camera sensors need a good amount of light to create a nice, clean image. Underexposed images appear noisy and muddy and ugh. So have enough light. Second one is to enhance the feel of the scene. If you're doing a chaotic action scene, you can make the lights blink and come and go in different colors and go crazy. But if you're filming a nice, calm and quiet scene, you can use just a warm, soft light, or change it to a cool light if it's a sad scene. This is the quality of light, hard versus soft, cool versus warm, and so on. And third, visual impact. This is where the eye candy comes in. Our eyes love contrast. The difference between light and dark values helps us understand shapes. And this is best achieved probably with the direction of the light. If you blast light from the direction of your camera, you make everything look very flat and boring. So instead, move the light to the side at least 45 degrees to create more visual interest. If you're lighting a character, make this light a large one, because the bigger the surface of the light is, the softer the shadows appear, and vice versa. And usually you want the primary light, also called key light, to have a flattering effect on our subject, and soft shadows will do that. Then on the almost the opposite side of the key light, you can drop another light that helps separate the character from the background. Now, see there's a sliver of shadow on the face? That's the contrast we're looking for. We can read the shape of the face better and it's no longer flat. If you think the shadow is too dark, you can add a third light on the shadow side to lift up that shadow just a bit. This is called a fill light, and this whole setup is called three-point lighting. Now this is a very basic setup, but when in doubt, just start with this and add one light at a time and see how it affects the mood. There are different types of lighting scenarios. An ad or a sitcom is usually high key lighting, where there's very little shadows and everything's very bright and safe. And then there's low key, which is often used in films to create depth and intrigue and drama. And then there are various stylized scenarios, like the Sin City short film I did a few years ago, which was all edge-lit hard lights. And it's just so much fun. I really like that look. Going back to Unreal and the Craving with this knowledge now, first thing you should do is go to the project settings and turn off auto exposure. If left on, this autocorrects the exposure all the time, and it's impossible to set your light levels. It's useful in games, but not really in film projects. I originally intended to use mostly just ambient light for this, but I quickly ran into a technical problem which I just couldn't solve. It seemed that the metahuman grooms absolutely hated ambient light. They just start to glow in the dark. I spent so much time researching this and trying various solutions, but nothing really did much. So I finally came up with a workaround. I faked the ambient lighting by shooting large area lights through the windows. These were very soft, very low power lights, but still direct lights that worked better with the grooms, eliminating most of the glow. But fortunately, that's in the past because this doesn't seem to be an issue anymore in Unreal 5.7 at least. So hopefully you don't have to deal with this. But still, it made me think of an interesting workflow that ultimately elevated the look of the entire film. But more about that in the next video because it goes into the rendering territory. But like I said, I used fake ambient lights from the windows to do the heavy lifting and then just emphasized that with extra lights here and there. And these were all cool lights. Then I used warm point lines to mimic the interior candles. When we talk about warm or cool light, we mean the visual temperature of the light, and that's measured in Kelvin. Lower values appear warmer and higher values appear cooler. Normally something like moonlight is about 4000 Kelvin and candlelight is around 2000. But moonlight appears cooler at night, and I wasn't getting enough separation between them and I wanted a bit more stylized look. So I kept my camera's white balance at 5500K and pushed the candlelights into that 4000 area and the moonlight all the way up to 9000K. And while it's not technically accurate, it gave me the look I wanted with nice balance and color contrast between the warm and cool tones. And I didn't do much color grading in post at all. Couple of tips for lighting. Don't be afraid to have shadows in the shot. Don't overdo the lighting, just keep it simple. Try to establish direction for the lights. Even if you're using ambient lighting, throw in at least one key light that slightly overpowers the ambient and creates contrast and direction. Also consider the motivation of the light source. Use or add practical lights to the set. If there's a window on the right of the shot, it makes sense to boost the light from that direction. But if there is no visual indication of light source on the left, it might look weird if you light from that direction, as if the light is seemingly coming out of nowhere. If your subject is drowning in ambient light, for example in a bright outdoor scene, use negative fill. This is a real-world technique, but works in 3D and Unreal as well. So place a black object like a plane or a cube just outside the frame to block some of the light on your subject to create a little bit of shadow and depth. Finally, it's sometimes a good addition to add highlights for the eyes. If the light setup is otherwise good but there's no reflection in the character's eyes, they can seem a little lifeless. So by adding just a small light, just so that it doesn't affect the overall lighting but just gives a nice highlight or catch light reflected in the eyes. Also look into IES profiles and gobos to add another level of realism for the lights. Alright, this turned into a mini filmmaking course on its own, but I hope this was useful, and if I accidentally glossed over something you wanted to know about, let me know in the comments. In the next video, we'll take a quick look at the weather effects and then move on to rendering and editing. And I dare to say the filmic post-process alone is worth subbing and hitting the bell. Just putting it out there. I'll see you there. Okay, bye.